There were two different times that I got to spend a lot of time with them growing up. I remember most kind of my early elementary years, about every 2 years we'd go visit them and spend a week or sometimes 2 at their house. I was probably like 8, 10, 12, around in that age. And
we call them Grandpa and Grandma Mac, and it never changed from that. And I like the casualness of it. They lived far away from me most of my life, and they lived quietly, and so we came to them. My mom was a great connector.
I spent a lot of time with them. My first real recollection is when I was, it had been 7 and a half. I spent 6 weeks with them in their home in Ogden. My mom and dad's friends drove up to Utah and we went with them. And then we stayed there for 6 weeks until my parents came and got us. And so we lived with them. And oh, I loved it. Yeah.
The minute I think of Grandma and Grandpa, I think of Gramercy Avenue. I remember their home very well.
And as a child, I remember we always really looked forward to going to their house. It was this wonderful place. They had this cute little house in Gramercy Avenue that it was red with white trim. It had a cool cement front porch that we could sit on and kind of peek over the wall there at what was going on the street. And then on the back, they had a huge porch with different levels. And
I remember the red painted house, and I believe there was a white picket fence. I remember a big open green lawn and a big backyard.
And her yard was so beautiful. We played hours and hours back there under the willow tree, and then we would go across the little bridge, across the irrigation ditch that divided the yard with the garden and the orchard back there, and we'd go play back there. Oh, it was just magical.
Working, they had over an acre of land with an orchard and a huge garden, and he'd turn over the whole thing by hand, no rototillers, and take care of things. So
I remember laying in the backyard under that big weeping willow, and ever since then, I have loved those trees. Anytime I see a weeping willow, I think of Grandma and Grandpa's backyard. And I remember there were grapevines running along one of the fences. I remember they had a really nice garden, of course looked beautiful and was very fruitful. I remember a clothesline.
She would let us play, in the backyard. When she had a long clothesline where she would hang up her clothes, and in the summer she hardly ever used her dryer that I remember. She would always go and hang up her towels and her sheets. And so she made Allison and I a little clothesline for our dog clothes. So we would wash our clothes and then we'd go hang them out. And I still remember that.
And she would let us wash Dolly clothes and hang them up on a rope with clothespins between the fence and the house.
there's a little bridge you went over to where the chicken coop was, and I think Doug raised chickens there when he was growing up, but it was all cleaned out and just this cool cement floor in the little shed.
Whenever I eat raspberries, I think of my grandma. Immediately, it's an immediate thing every time I taste a raspberry, because the first time I tasted them, it was in her backyard. I was a suburban girl with an attorney father and a fast-paced education. And I went to visit her, and she lived a very busy life, but it was quiet and calm. And I would go in the back, and she would pick and pick and pick and pick forever. I couldn't believe as a child how patient she was. And I tasted raspberries there, and it's always Grandma. Strong memory.
It's funny, I remember smells and little images of that summer. I remember her and Aunt Jeannie were picking beans, and they let us, snap the ends off of the beans. I remember the raspberries. I just loved fresh raspberries ever since then, and helping Grandma pick them or do something with them. And I can't remember exactly what.
Just so many fun things to do. We'd pick raspberries with her. She'd always come in the morning with a bowl of fresh raspberries to go on the cracked wheat cereal, and she taught me how to pick beans and things in their garden that they kept. And then they had all of the trees. I was trying to think what must have been ripe when we were there, because it's sort of July, August, but so I don't know if we ever had cherries or apples, but I do remember having ladders up the trees that we would, the older kids got to climb up and pick things. And So it was a really fun place to be, so many different things to enjoy.
And Grandpa took us out and helped us climb a ladder to pick cherries off the cherry tree.
They had a cherry orchard, and I remember we were sent out in the cherry orchard to pick cherries, and I remember Grandma coming out like an hour and a half later, and we were just sitting there eating. We hadn't picked any cherries. I remember her reminding us that we were there to pick cherries, not just eat cherries. But I remember just sitting in the crook of that tree and just eating. I love cherries to this day. But I read it in my journal. I said, I have to read what it said. I got to mow the lawn for the first time. Grandpa told me I could. And I love that he let me. And I remember actually him taking me out to the shed. And he had Alzheimer's at that time. And I remember him coming out and helping me pull the lawnmower out. And I remember, so that was the first time I ever got to mow the lawn. Which was,
During the day, I remember him pretty much working outside all the time. He was always doing something, either tinkering with something in the little shed behind their garage or working hard in the gardens. He was always working hard.
I still remember playing school, and there's a little shed out there that she put an old school desk in, and we just loved it. It was so much fun.
She had one of those old-fashioned school desks where the seats are attached to the desk in front of it, and there's an inkwell, and she had a couple of those there that she set out so that we could play school, and she'd bring in extra materials they were discarding from the school that we could use to play school in the back. So
We would go out into the shed, which they had made into a schoolroom, and they had the old-fashioned desks where the lid pops up and you can put your supplies inside of it. And my sister Maylee and I loved to role play, and especially school. We would be teachers our whole lives. So that just fit right into who we were.
They had a shed out in the backyard, and we turned it into a schoolhouse. And that was like the funnest summer ever. And I remember we swept everything out and cleaned everything out, and they had these old-fashioned school desks that, like the real authentic ones from back in the pioneer days, from my point of view, And so we had those kind of desks, and we had taken we took cardboard boxes and opened them up and then stapled them or nailed them onto the wall. So we had this beautiful wall that we could use as a chalkboard. And I just remember playing school for hours, and it was so much fun. And it's cool because I'm a teacher now, and it's in our blood. It's in our blood. We love to teach. Grandpa was a principal. And so for me, it's so fun that it kind of started there. And I remember later I ended up working or just volunteering up at This Is the Place Park, where they have the monument and Pioneer Park. I worked as the school teacher there on Saturdays, so I'd go and teach in the one-room schoolhouse, and it reminded me of, doing that at Grandma and Grandpa's that summer.
Irrigation was something that we weren't familiar with in Michigan. We had so much rain, so their yard was irrigated, and every so often they'd open the gates and the whole lawn would flood. So there'd be standing water out there, and it was like a major slip and slide. We'd all go out in the front slopes in our swimming suits and just slide down and across, and it was the most fun.
And then when the irrigation water came in, that was the best day of the week. And we could go, and they were so nice. They didn't care about us squishing their grass. Because as a parent, I could see how that would be a real problem, having a whole bunch of grandchildren running around in the irrigation water on your grass, squishing your grass. But they didn't care, and we could play and run around, and we thought it was better than the beach.
And then we would run out when the irrigation came up, and the water was so cold on our feet. And no one was scared that their yards were flooding. In Texas, when things flooded, it was frightening, and snakes went flowing down the street, so that was a problem. But here it was this splash park, and we would run around, and no one minded. They would sit on the porch and shell peas and laugh at us.
I had never seen irrigation, so I remember the first time we flooded the yard, it totally flooded the yard, and we turned it into a big slip and slide. We were like, whoa, water park slide, we're all running around, sliding around. And I remember Grandma coming out and saying, You can't use the yard as a slip and slide, you'll ruin the grass. So then we just went and played in the ditch. But I remember how fun that was.
When it was an irrigation day for the yard, they had a ditch in the back that was just like a little stream that ran past, and she'd help us make boats out of walnut shells that we could go floating on there. And
It was nice. I think lots of times children from my generation need lots of toys and lots of amusement entertainment, and we're used to that. But there was entertainment in just living. The long rows of raspberries and the asparagus spears that were taller than your head at the end, and running through the grass that was all covered in water, and making your paper boats with Grandma and floating them down the irrigation canals. This was all brand new to a child from Texas. And it was as good as Disneyland, and it was very memorable.